Our guest is arrived.
Ah.
Now, do you prefer R. Derek Black or Derek Black?
R. Derek Black is my writing name, and Derek is how you can refer to me.
Okay, is the
That
R
works.
because of there was already a Derek Black?
No, I actually had the dominant Google results for Derek Black, but R went there because it was an important personal moment for me. I swapped my middle and first name when I condemned white nationalism and tried to not have anyone know who I was for several years, and so the R marks that period.
Oh, it's Roland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the book you're promoting, I've read most of it. I didn't read all of it because we got it like 2 days ago, but it's really good, man. It's called The Klansman's Son, and what an incredible story you have.
Oh, thanks so much.
I guess we want to start with you were raised by your dad, Don, his name is right?
Mm-hmm.
Don Black, who started Stormfront, and white nationalism was kind of the philosophy of your family.
Yeah, it was their philosophy, but they had also helped build it. They got into it when they were teenagers and spent decades before I was born trying to construct the whole thing.
Yeah, your dad, I know, is very close to David Duke. And it's also an interesting family history you have. Like, your mom was married. Was your mom married to David?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom married David when they met in college, and then my two sisters are his kids.
And he was best man at your dad's wedding with your mom.
He was. The three of them knew each other when they were young. Like, David and my dad met when they were teenagers at the first white nationalist event they went to, and then my mom and David met in college, and so all three of them knew each other when they were in their 20s.
Most people don't. We have no working. Not like most people don't interact with people who have been openly, like, you know what I mean. Like, so it's kind of a fascinating world to look into. What did your dad do in the Klan?
So he originally, as a teenager, started running campaigns. He worked for segregationist political campaigns. He was in that era in Alabama right after George Wallace had been shot and not successfully won the presidency, but ran a third-party campaign. And after that, he and David founded a Ku Klux Klan organization. And the reason for it was because the Klan was a popular name in the South. Like, it was not something that people thought was incredibly marginal, and they were trying to create a more popular movement. And so I think part of that is like the era.
And when you're a kid growing up, and the Klan is like the life, I guess it's just, is it a normal upbringing otherwise? Like, he's just, people see, like, what was this title in the Klan? What was the Grand
Wizard? Yeah.
And people see Grand Wizard, they see this like ominous, evil title, but like at home, he's just your dad.
Okay, so part of it is, by the time I was born, they were kind of old. I'm getting old now, so now I look back on it, but they were in their 40s when I was born, which is old for parents. They didn't expect I was going to be born, and by that point, they had quit the Klan. Like, my dad had left the Klan in the mid 80s, and I was born in 89, and so when I was born, I had that experience of like, wow, I see these pictures of him, with burning crosses and people with weapons, and he had tried to invade the island of Dominica in the 80s before I was born. He had served a 2-year prison sentence for it. But the version of him that I knew was kind of quiet and older and more sedate and a little bit regretful of the way that he had tried to shock and awe. Like, that was his phrase. He had tried to shock and awe people. And by the time that I was born, he was still radical. He was still a far-right leader, but he was trying to create something that seemed a little bit more approachable to suburban moms.
You're homeschooled, so everything is kind of like, in the house and insular. And then your mom, I think, suggested, like, signed you up for college. A couple questions about that. One was, what was it in college that kind of got you towards thinking in a different way? And second would be, do you think that in hindsight she regrets taking you to college or suggesting it?
I don't know how she thinks about the regret. So everybody in my family went to college. It's not like I was some, first generation person.
Right.
Like, my grandparents had gone to college. My great-grandparents got PhDs. It was not like an uneducated family. And so the reason she was dropping me off at college was because I had gotten to be 19 years old, and she realized it wasn't a ruse. I was saying, like, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a carpenter or something, work with my hands and do craft
Yeah.
projects and stuff. And she said, we're not that kind of family. It was this sort of like classist thing, actually. And so she dropped me off at initially community college, and I had been homeschooled, and I didn't know if I'd be good at college. I think I was intimidated that I had been homeschooled in a worse way than some homeschoolers. I was unschooled, which meant they just let me decide what I was going to learn. And so there was a lot of stuff I didn't know, and then a lot of stuff I was shockingly good at. I was good at writing because I just liked writing. And I got there and I really liked it. I then transferred to a liberal arts college in Florida, public school, and they were questioning it because it was this super liberal arts college where people were social justice. But I also believed in this ideology not in a like insecure way, not in a way that I thought was insecure, where I was afraid of being argued against. I thought I'd been argued against my whole life. Like I thought I had heard all the arguments, and I sort of had, but I didn't recognize how I hadn't like thought about them because had no idea how getting so close to people would make it more possible to hear the arguments. Like I didn't have any sense that the reason an argument lands, the reason why you sit with it is not like, is it inherently factual or not? Like, it's hard to tell that at first. The reason you sit with an argument is because the person on the other end matters to you, and you genuinely want to hear, you think I'm incredibly wrong. I care about you. You're telling me I'm hurting you with the stuff I'm saying. Okay, I'll listen to that. And that was what was totally different from like just thousands of emails of people saying the same stuff, but they were just anonymous people on the internet who I could easily say just don't get me.
What
when that moment happens, right? When you go, oh no, it's not that I might be wrong, it's that I've been wrong. Like this is not right. When that moment happens, it's not just like you can shift your viewpoint. Your entire life has now been based on this thing that you've realized is wrong. What's kind of the beginning of that process when you commit to the fact that like I've got to live in reality, which means I have to kind of denounce everything that's been drilled into my head and my entire family up until this point?
It was really hard. It was So I got to that period. It wasn't fast at all. Like I spent a semester at that college without anybody knowing my background. I just made lots of friends. I always thought I could sort of lead two lives. Like when I was 9, I started a personal webpage, and it was the next year that I started a white nationalist webpage when I was 10. And I just always thought I could have, my hobbies, and we can talk about whatever you want. And then white nationalism is this important world thing, and it's my family. And people just didn't want to talk about it most of the time when I was a teenager, which, they just would back off. And at the college, the difference was I realized these people are going to be, they're just going to be horrified when they find out what I advocate. All you had to do was Google me. It wasn't a secret. They just didn't do that. And I made all these relationships I knew were going to blow up. And most of them did. Like, basically all of those close relationships did once I was outed, and people realized just even on the level of what I was keeping from them. It was like, how good of a friend are you if you're like lying to me about who you are? And I've told you, I had people who, were telling me about how racism and anti-Semitism had like scared them when they were growing up, and realized in those conversations, like I knew the people they were talking about. And then so they found this out later. And so when I came back to the college, I still thought I was right. I still thought, I've got all these facts and IQ and statistics. And I had rationalized that people could be anything individually, which is how I even made those relationships. But, racism must be true on an aggregate. It must be true about millions of people. And so when I got back, the closest I was saying, okay, I care about this community. People are telling me I am hateful and ignorant and all this stuff that I don't want to be. Basically, they're telling me how much I am harming them. And I just wanted to find some kind of like, is there a misunderstanding? And then that was what led to private conversations. I got invited to a Shabbat dinner, which is a observant Jewish dinner every Friday night, before the Sabbath. And I met people there, specifically one person, but people there who ended up having these private conversations where they were like, how do you rationalize this worldview? You're friends with all these people who your ideology says don't belong here. Could you even try to explain that to me? And at first I thought, oh yeah, I've explained this a million times to a million people. And as I started doing it, I realized I've never been in private explaining it to somebody who didn't believe it, who thought it was wrong, who thought it was hateful, but also respected and knew me and wanted to hear my side of this. And I got into those conversations and I realized, okay, wow, this is actually way different than I've ever done before.
You said something in the book which was really, I thought was really smart, is that these dinners you'd go to, and they stayed away. Nobody tried to lecture you. Nobody tried to force feed. And I think that's a big problem with people trying to talk to each other, is the whole culture is built on scolding and a little slap on the hand and look at how right I am. But they didn't do that. They didn't give you anything to push back against. They basically, just by being themselves and being a welcoming atmosphere, it kind of starts to force you to see things a little bit differently. And it's harder to argue when no one is pushing against you.
Yeah. If you had asked me at the time, or like the year after I condemned my family's movement at the end of college, I would have been like, yeah, 100%. Everybody who was scolding me and ostracizing me and saying, I shouldn't be at this college, totally backfired and actually made it so much harder, and more likely I was going to recoil. And initially when I got back, I organized a seminar in Tennessee for white nationalists to argue for white nationalism, because I look back and it's like I just needed a bunch of people to tell me I was right. And so I got all these leaders from around the world to do this thing. And I looked back and I said, oh, it's the people who were trying to chase me away. They were the ones who made me want to do that. And I was pretty indignant and defensive and all this stuff. When I look back on it now, I think all of that was necessary. I do not think that I would have sat at those dinners and had the conversations about where do you think I'm wrong, and actually sat with it in private, had I not had the majority of the campus saying that I was wrong and dangerous and stupid and ignorant. And maybe I'll take back the dangerous, because they didn't say I was dangerous. They said yeah, we know this kid is not dangerous, this kid is not violent, but this kid is at the very least incredibly naive about the threat and danger that they're bringing to this school and our community. And so we're going to prioritize the people who feel afraid. Jewish Student Life Organization stopped meeting at first when I got back, not because they were worried about me, but because they were worried about the fact that I was connected to a violent anti-Semitic movement, and they didn't want to post where they were going to be meeting. It was legitimately scary to them. And if I was showing up and saying oh, I don't want to be harming people, it wasn't even a big leap to say, I recognize too that you have good reason to be afraid of this movement I represent. And so if there hadn't been that, I don't know why I would have leaned in. It would have been like all the other conversations where I was like, let's just not talk about it. Let's talk about, literature or movies or something.
So that kind of got the ball rolled. That kind of happened because then it made those dinners more meaningful, whereas they might not have been if you didn't have all that stuff coming down on you in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I got to the facts felt sort of easy to accept, actually. In the moment, they were super hard. Facts that I thought were true. I thought, that white nationalists misuse statistics. They try to argue that race is this biological thing. Race is not a biological thing. There's no biological definition of race. It's just a social thing. There's groups of humans in the world. Race is not it. And I was able to look at that and say, oh, wow, this kind of undermines a lot of the arguments that I think support white nationalism. But I was able to accept them because I wanted to be somebody who accepted facts, and I was able to sit there and think about it. What became impossible at the end was saying, oh, God, this is morally wrong and factually wrong. I can't just stop talking about it. I actually need to push back. I need to do something, which means I need to break with my family and my community and basically every relationship that I've formed until I was 21 years old. And oh my God, I've tied myself in, and it's my identity, and changing my beliefs is going to lose my relationships, and I'm not even going to know who I am anymore. And it felt terrible because I was like, oh wow, I've been somebody who thought they believed stuff for rational facts, and it turns out I'm somebody kind of like all of us who feels afraid of losing my community.
Obviously, you there was another revelation you made in the book, which I want to ask you about a couple of things, because you said interesting things that when you were a kid, you kept long hair, and you said you liked when people would mistake you as a girl from the back.
Yeah.
What was that feel? It wasn't a sexual feeling? What was the feeling?
I mean, now it's been years and years, and now I look back on it, it's just gender is a thing that we experience ourselves, and I'm surprised I'm surprised trans stuff is not a more universal experience, because that's what I thought it was growing up. I always had these complicated gender feelings where I was like, yeah, no, I just don't like being a boy, it's just that was my 5-year-old perspective. But I accepted all along, both because I grew up in that family and because I grew up in America, that we all just we accept the roles we're given. We dress the way we're told to dress. It's like the exchange that we make. We present in a certain way based on what we're told we're supposed to do, and in exchange we get security and living in a society, and we all have. And it was like at New College was the first place where I started encountering the idea that there's no real reason that you need to accept whatever, role or presentation you're given. But even then I didn't say, oh, I want to do anything about this. Partly, because I had internalized that as a kid, that there was just no way to do that. There was no way to like live a life doing that. And so I started to forget the difference between like wanting to do something and like not feeling able to do something, which is why, I condemned white nationalism. And it was not having complicated feelings of gender was not the thing that felt like top of mind at that moment. It didn't feel like, oh, great, now I can be open about that. It was years more after that where I felt actually, I feel like I do need to do something about that. And it's been like the last few years, which is why it's barely in the book. I acknowledge in the book that it has been something the last few years I've become much more comfortable talking about. If I were writing it now, I would write a lot more about it. And 3 years ago when I was first starting the book, I just wasn't even there. I didn't know whether I wanted to share it at all.
Had you dressed, had you tried dressing like a girl when you were a kid, or was there ever those?
Yeah, there was all those like kind of stuff, the like classic trans stuff, being like a kid wearing dresses and stuff. And then I got to whatever age it is that my family started telling me it's like, you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Oh, they knew you were doing it.
Oh, well, I mean, it was just like, sort of like fun when you're a kid. It's just like play acting when you're a kid. And at least in my family, there was a certain point where it's like, oh, you're getting older. You can't do that stuff anymore. And, I just sort of accepted it. I, always had the feelings, but I was like, we don't get to be who we want to be was kind of what I experienced and like the lesson that I got from them. And I think we all use similar words sometimes and don't mean the same things, but, I do think there's a lot of ways that everybody is a little bit beholden to an image of who they're supposed to be than necessarily full authenticity would lead us to be, because we all make choices and sacrifices, but some more than others. And that's that's been my experience over the last few years, is realizing like I'm making more sacrifices presenting as just like a cis dude than I need to be making.
Would you feel like you were lying publicly by not dressing the way you wanted? Let me ask you again. It's very confusing sometimes, the terminology. You're transgender.
Yep. Yeah. No, I identify as transgender.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it.
So when you were, did you feel like you were being not dishonest because you're a liar, but like I'm not being who I want? Like, did you feel like I feel like I'm wearing a men's clothes which as like a costume almost? Did you not feel?
Yes, actually, like not the liar thing. Like it didn't feel like I was deceiving anybody because I actually internalized the idea that like nobody is authentic. Like this is something I told myself. I don't think that's true, but it was a discovery. Like I don't know what it was 5 or 6 years ago. I was having a conversation with someone and I made this comment. I think she had like gotten some new outfits or something. We were talking about them and I made a comment. I was like, well, nobody wears clothes because they make them feel good. We wear clothes because that's the appropriate dress code for that moment. And she was like, wait, what? And it was sort of like that kind of feeling of reassessing that anybody ever presents in a way that feels like they like it. And so I didn't feel like I was deceiving anybody. I thought that we were all sort of acting in a way that seemed like the social script and that nobody was happy about it and that everybody just went along because that's what was expected of us, and realizing that sometimes people wear something they don't want to wear for a certain setting, but for the most part they kind of feel like they're presenting in a way that feels like them. And that was one of the like early things where I was like, well, are you supposed to feel at all good about how you present yourself to the world? And realizing yes you should was kind of a step to going back to being like, well, what would that mean if I did that?
How did you tell your mom and dad this part? Like was it, and which was easier for them to take?
I am going to accept that I don't think it's fully my fault, because I think my family, for being very outspoken, are incredibly avoidant about conversations. But I've said for years that I felt bad about telling them that I was, condemning white nationalism by writing a public letter. Well, in this case, I told them by like sending them a copy of the book. And so,
wow.
I mean, they read it before everybody else, but still, it was like having that conversation with them. So I no longer feel like I can say I feel bad about telling them about anti-racism that way, because I think My justification is they're a very public family, and privately they're a family that does not know how to talk about stuff. And I think talking about things publicly is how I've ever been able to communicate with them.
And the book is called The Klansman's Son. And it's really great. I mean, it's so open and it's honest and it's very, very straightforward. So it's very easy to, I don't know, your family is seen as a family, and which I like, because again, people have this impression of who these people are, but it's very, very well done. And
15 seconds?
Sure,
could actually,
of course.
Because you said the title, and I feel like I haven't said this to anybody publicly. We talked about the title, and that was one of the points I came out to my publisher about.
Sure.
Gender's complicated. I like this title. It's Klansman Son's a good title, and I got to tell you more to understand why it's a complicated title. And if anybody wonders about it, I liked it and chose it because I feel like I did not like being called a Klansman's son, and I think people can hear the Klansman part. That seems rough to be called a Klansman's son growing up. But like both words were complicated.
It's also too it's
Wow,
how you grow up.
Yeah.
You grew up as the Klansman son, so it's like not just doesn't have to be about now. It can be about all that.
When people hear it, I want them to ask like, what's it like to be called a Klansman's son for your whole life when you're growing up? How do you deal with that?